A single decisive moment on September 1st, 1943, at the Rabel Airfield in New Britain, saw Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai's hand hover over a freshly delivered intelligence report. His vision, a solitary good eye, the other claimed by American gunners a year prior, sweeping across words that provoked a sudden, sharp laugh within the sweltering humidity of the operations tent. The Americans, it seemed, had birthed a new fighter, a machine as cumbersome as a bomber and as broad as a transport plane, a creation they dared to call the Hellcat, and our intelligence even suggested it tipped the scales at double the weight of our nimble Zero, solidifying it as yet another testament to flawed American design. Beyond the tent's canvas flaps, he could feel the presence of his squadron's A6M Zeros, poised and ready on the pierced steel planking, their forms sleek, agile, and utterly lethal. For 2 long years, these very aircraft had asserted an unyielding dominance over the Pacific skies, effortlessly vanquishing British Hurricanes, American P-40s, and Dutch Brewster Buffaloes, all of which had crumbled before the might of the Zero's guns. And this latest American endeavor, this bloated Hellcat, was destined to meet the very same fate. What Sakai could not possibly fathom, what not a single one of the Japanese naval aviators gathering for their morning briefing could possibly know, was that in exactly 30 days this perceived failure would ignite the systematic and utter annihilation of Japanese naval aviation. The F6F Hellcat was on the verge of achieving a staggering 19-to-1 kill ratio, a legacy built upon the destruction of 5,223 enemy aircraft while suffering a mere 270 losses in aerial combat, a feat that would fundamentally transform the nature of carrier warfare, shatter the spine of Japanese air power, and expose the Zero's reign of terror as a dominion built upon a foundation of fatally flawed assumptions. As the very mathematics of aerial supremacy were about to be violently rewritten by an aircraft that appeared all wrong, felt heavy in the sky, and seemed to brazenly violate every single principle the Japanese had so painstakingly perfected. Yet, in a mere 6 months, the very pilots who now echoed with laughter at the intelligence reports would find themselves penning their final, desperate letters home, consumed by the chilling realization that an encounter with Hellcats was a statistical certainty of death, marking the zenith of the rising sun's glorious ascent. The confidence radiating from the Japanese Navy in September 1943 was not born of arrogance. It was a conviction rooted firmly in the cold, hard language of mathematics. Since that fateful day of December the 7th, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Naval Air Service had consistently achieved victory ratios that defied all logic and belief. At Pearl Harbor, they had sacrificed a mere 29 aircraft while obliterating 347. In the Philippines, a scant 7 losses were traded for 103 enemy planes destroyed, and over Darwin, the toll was a mere 2 losses against 30, a relentless campaign that saw the British Far East Fleet's air arm utterly annihilated and the Dutch East Indies Air Force systematically eliminated in a matter of days. And at the very heart of this overwhelming dominance soared the Mitsubishi A6M Zero, an aircraft that had single-handedly rewritten the fundamental rules of fighter design. When American engineers finally tested captured examples in 1942, they initially refused to accept the staggering performance figures. For a fighter possessing the range of a bomber, the maneuverability of a biplane, and the raw firepower to obliterate anything it caught in its sights seemed an impossible, almost mythical creation. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, the man destined to become Japan's revered ace of aces with 87 confirmed kills, perfectly captured the essence of the Zero in his recovered diary, writing, "Flying the Zero is like wearing wings. The aircraft responds to thought, not just control input," a stark contrast to the American planes which he described as flying like trucks, powerful but clumsy, a reflection of a nation that built its fighters with the same philosophy as its cars: heavy, overbuilt, wasteful. The Zero achieved its miraculous, almost unbelievable performance through a revolutionary design philosophy, utilizing extra superduralumin, a classified aluminum alloy that forged a structure a full 30% lighter than any comparable American design. A design that ruthlessly sacrificed armor plate protection for the pilot and eschewed the weight of self-sealing fuel tanks, even going so far as to frequently remove the radio, all in a relentless pursuit of performance where every single ounce was offered up on the altar of speed and agility. The initial intelligence reports on the F6F Hellcat, which trickled into Japanese intelligence through neutral Swedish sources in early 1943, were met with profound dismissal, the specifications themselves seeming more like blatant propaganda, or perhaps even a deliberate campaign of misinformation. The aircraft, they claimed, weighed a staggering 12,186 pounds when loaded, a figure that dwarfed the Zero's nimble 5,800 pounds. Its wing area spanned an immense 334 square feet, encumbered by a drag-inducing radial engine, and it was laden with 2,400 rounds of ammunition, ubiquitous armor plate, bulletproof glass, and self-sealing tanks capable of holding 250 gallons of fuel. Captain Minoru Genda, the tactical genius who had masterminded the Pearl Harbor attack, reviewed these specifications at the Combined Fleet Headquarters, and his analysis, carefully preserved in the Japanese Defense Archives, was utterly dismissive. The Americans have learned nothing, he concluded. This Hellcat represents the continuation of their failed philosophy, attempting to overcome pilot skill with the sheer weight of machinery, a conviction that led him to boldly declare, "A Zero will fly circles around it." The mathematics of the situation appeared to lend firm support to his confident assessment. The Zero's wing loading of a mere 22 pounds per square foot granted it a tight turning radius of 612 feet, while the Hellcat's cumbersome wing loading of 36.5 pounds per square foot suggested a far wider turning radius of over 900 feet, making it, in the context of a turning fight, the very foundation of all Japanese fighter tactics, utterly and hopelessly helpless. The first fleeting glimpse of this new reality came on September 30th, 1943, over Marcus Island, where Petty Officer First Class Yoshio Fukui, flying escort for a reconnaissance mission, spotted them, 6 dark blue shapes ascending from the southeast. His initial thought, meticulously recorded in his after-action report, being that they were B-25 bombers on a strangely altered heading. But then they turned and he saw it, the distinctive, unmistakable silhouette of a single-engine fighter with a massive fuselage and wings that seemed almost comically short for its body. First encounter with F6F type fighter, he would later write. His initial impression being that the Americans have mounted fighter guns on a torpedo bomber, and so he engaged with standard tactics, which meant leveraging the Zero's superior turn rate to mercilessly get on the enemy's tail. Fukui confidently rolled into a diving turn, fully expecting the heavy American fighter to continue its straight trajectory, thereby allowing him to elegantly curve onto its vulnerable six-hit position, but instead, something utterly unprecedented unfolded before his eyes. The Hellcat didn't run, nor did it attempt to engage in a turning duel with him. Instead, it went vertical, its Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, a beast producing a colossal 2,000 horsepower, a full 700 more than the Zero's Nakajima Sakai's, 1,130 horsepower, driving the Hellcat upward at an astonishing 3,500 feet per minute. Fukui, desperately attempting to follow, watched in disbelief as his airspeed bled away, the Zero struggling mightily against the relentless pull of gravity, and then, at 15,000 feet, the Hellcat executed a maneuver that should have been physically impossible for an aircraft of its weight. A flawless hammerhead turn that dropped it directly onto Fukui's tail. The American opened fire at 400 meters, Fukui reported, his voice tinged with awe and terror. 6 machine guns, not the 4 we expected, a barrage where the volume of fire was unprecedented, and his aircraft took 17 hits in 3 seconds, awasise, devastating onslaught from which he only by dropping into a spin did I escape. Fukui survived, just barely managing to limp back to Marcus Island with his Zero riddled with holes, a stark testament to his narrow escape. But his wingman, Petty Officer Second Class Masao, did not return, and neither did the reconnaissance plane they were tasked with escorting, marking the first blood drawn by the Hellcat. The weight paradox was further illuminated on October 5, 1943, when Task Force 14 struck Wake Island and Lieutenant Yoshio Shiga led 12 Zeros from the 252nd Air Group to intercept what initially appeared to be another routine nuisance raid, as American carriers had been launching these hit-and-run attacks for months, typically fleeing before Japanese fighters could fully engage. This time would be different, Shiga resolved as they climbed to 20,000 feet, his diary entry later recording, "Below us, 12 F6F fighters in 3 divisions, a sight that filled him with confidence, for we held every advantage, altitude, position, surprise, making victory certain." The engagement that followed, however, completely shattered the foundations of Japanese tactical doctrine, for as the Zeros dove on the Hellcats, the American fighters didn't scatter or attempt to turn. They maintained a disciplined formation, accelerating in a gentle dive that kept their energy reserves high. And when the Zeros opened fire at maximum range, hoping for a few lucky hits, the Hellcats simply absorbed the punishment with an almost indifferent resilience. The Hellcat's armor, a formidable defense, included 212 pounds of plate protecting the pilot and another 110 pounds shielding the oil system, complemented by self-sealing tanks that could withstand dozens of hits. And as the Zeros exhausted their ammunition in fruitless diving passes, the Hellcats executed their devastating counterattack. Instead of turning to dogfight, they ingeniously used their weight as a weapon, climbing at full power to reach altitudes where the Zero's engine gasped for oxygen. At 25,000 feet, the Hellcat was still generating a robust 1,650 horsepower, while the Zero's output had dwindled to a mere 900. "They came down on us like hawks on sparrows," Shiga wrote, his words painting a vivid picture of the carnage. "Their weight gave them speed we couldn't match. A deadly dance where they would dive, fire those 6 terrible guns, then climb away before we could react. A brutal exchange that left 8 Zeros shot down with no Hellcats lost." The prophecy of the Marianas Turkey Shoot began to take shape on November 11, 1943, in Rabaul, where the assembled pilots of the 204th Air Group listened intently as Lieutenant Commander Isao Tanimizu, a seasoned veteran with 32 victories and one of the few pilots to have survived multiple encounters with Hellcats, briefed them on the new American tactics. "Forget everything you know about air combat," he commanded, his voice heavy with the weight of experience. "The Americans have changed the rules, a new reality where they no longer fight our fight, but instead fight like executioners, not warriors." Tanimizu painstakingly explained what Japanese pilots were slowly and fatally learning. The Hellcat wasn't designed to outturn the Zero. It was designed to never need to, employing a combat doctrine known as energy fighting, where Hellcat pilots maintained speed and altitude, converting potential energy into kinetic energy and slashing, devastating attacks that gave Zero pilots absolutely no chance to leverage their superior maneuverability. "They work in pairs," Tanimizu continued, his words painting a grim picture of coordinated lethality. "One high, one low, a deadly trap where, while you engage one, the other is already diving on you." Their radios, which the Japanese had once laughed at for adding unnecessary weight, now allowing them to coordinate perfectly, a stark contrast to the Japanese pilots who fly as individual samurai while they fight as a machine. The technology gulf became terrifyingly apparent in December 1943 at Truk Lagoon, where Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, the man who had led the Pearl Harbor attack, now serving as air operations officer for the combined fleet, inspected damaged Zeros returning from encounters with Hellcats, revealing a growing and alarming technology gap. The disparity in firepower was a matter of cold, hard mathematics. The Hellcat's 6 Browning M2 machine guns fired 750 rounds per minute each, for a total of 4,500 rounds per minute, with each .50 caliber bullet weighing 46 grams and traveling at 2,900 feet per second, delivering a staggering 3,500 foot-pounds of energy, while the Zero's 2 7.7 millimeter machine guns fired projectiles weighing a mere 11 grams at 2,300 feet per second, yielding a paltry 750 foot-pounds of energy. More disturbing, however, were the reports of American radar-guided fighter direction, a technology that allowed Hellcat pilots to be guided to their targets by shipboard radar controllers who could see Japanese aircraft from 50 miles away, a stark contrast to the Japanese pilots who still relied on their eyesight to spot enemies. Lieutenant Sadamu Komachi described his first chilling experience with a radar-directed interception. "We were climbing through clouds when they hit us," he recalled. "No warning, no visual contact, just Hellcats diving from above, exactly on our heading, perfectly positioned, a terrifying realization that they knew where we were, our altitude, our course, leaving them feeling like blind men fighting those who could see in the dark." The pilot equation began to shift catastrophically by January 1944, as the Japanese pilot crisis deepened, a stark decline from the pre-war Imperial Navy pilot training program. Once the world's most demanding, which took 3 years and sent pilots into combat with 700 flight hours, while Army pilots received a minimum of 500 hours, creating artists of aerial combat trained in aerobatics, gunnery, and the spiritual philosophy of airfighting. By early 1944, however, Japanese naval pilots were entering combat with a mere 300 hours of flight time, and Army pilots with just 200, a crisis exacerbated by fuel shortages that meant most training was done in gliders. Gunnery practice was limited to a scant 50 rounds per pilot, and formation flying, instrument flight, and radio procedures were all eliminated in a desperate rush to get pilots to the front. Meanwhile, American pilots were arriving with a minimum of 300 hours, including 50 hours in type, having fired thousands of practice rounds, practiced carrier landings until they were second nature, and learned energy tactics in the safety of Texas airfields. Lieutenant Commander Yoshihiro Hashimoto, a training officer at Kasumigara Naval Air Station, wrote in his final grim report, "We are sending children to fight professionals," a sentiment underscored by a poignant example. Yesterday, Ensign Yamamoto arrived at the front, a young pilot who had never fired his guns in flight because we have no ammunition for practice, and had never flown at night because we have no fuel for such training, a tragic reality that saw him last a mere 7 minutes in his first combat. The Formosa revelation unfolded from October 12th to 16th, 1944, during the Battle of Formosa, where Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudome, commander of the 2nd Air Fleet, committed everything to stop the American carrier raids on Formosa, deploying over 700 aircraft, including the last of the trained pilots from the Homeland Training Squadrons, and the Japanese initially claimed a spectacular victory, boasting of 26 carriers and battleships sunk and 300 aircraft destroyed. The reality, discovered only after pilots returned and gun camera footage was developed, was a catastrophic and undeniable defeat, with actual American losses amounting to just 89 aircraft, while Japanese losses soared to a staggering 329 aircraft and almost every single experienced pilot. Lieutenant Sadaki Akamatsu, one of the few surviving veterans, described the slaughter in his memoirs with chilling clarity. "The Hellcats were waiting at every altitude," he wrote. "As we climbed, they were above us. As we dove, they were below," a horrifying realization that they had divided the sky into grids, each section covered by a division, a battle that was not combat, but rather systematic extermination. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot on June 19, 1944, in the Philippine Sea, saw the Japanese Navy commit its reconstituted carrier force to Operation Ago, the decisive battle that was meant to destroy American carrier power in the Pacific. A formidable force of 9 carriers and 450 aircraft, their best remaining pilots, pitted against Task Force 58 with its 15 carriers and 956 aircraft, 450 of which were F6F Hellcats. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa launched his strikes in 4 waves, confident that Japanese pilot skill and the Zero's range advantage would ultimately prevail. But the first wave of 69 aircraft, launched at Okit 30, was detected by American radar at a distance of 150 miles, allowing the Hellcats to be vectored for interception with perfect positioning, granting them the advantage of altitude, the sun at their backs, and an approach from the Japanese blind spots. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, leading the fighter escort, saw the Hellcats just minutes before the engagement. A terrifying sight he later described as stacked from 20,000 to 30,000 feet, at least 60 of them waiting like a steel curtain, while his own force was at a mere 18,000 feet, a situation where every advantage was theirs. The engagement lasted a mere 12 minutes, a brutal and one-sided affair in which 42 of the 69 Japanese aircraft were shot down, a day that saw Commander David McCampbell, CIG of Air Group 15, shoot down 7 aircraft in that single engagement, while his wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, claimed 6. The Zeros tried to turn with us, McCampbell reported, but we simply refused, instead employing a tactic where we'd make a high-side run, shoot one down, and zoom, climb back to altitude. A strategy that caused the Zeros to try to follow, stall out, and another Hellcat would pick them off, and by the end of the day, the Japanese had lost a staggering 346 carrier aircraft, plus another 50 land-based aircraft, while American losses totaled a mere 30 aircraft from all causes, a lopsided victory that led American pilots in their ready rooms that evening to coin the now infamous term turkey shoot, a grimly accurate description of how the enemy aircraft had been as helpless as game birds. The Leyte Gulf record was set on October 24, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, where Commander David McCampbell would achieve his single mission record, leading 7 Hellcats from the Essex to intercept a force of 60 Japanese aircraft heading for the American fleet. And in the ensuing 90-minute battle, McCampbell shot down an incredible 9 aircraft, 5 Zeros and 4 bombers, while his wingman, Roy Rushing, destroyed 6 more. I ran out of ammunition after the 9th kill, McCampbell recorded, noting that the Hellcat performed flawlessly throughout, and remarkably, not a single hit on my aircraft despite being outnumbered 8-1. An engagement that demonstrated the complete and utter reversal of air superiority, as 7 Hellcats had routed 60 Japanese aircraft, destroying 15 without a single loss, and McCampbell's 2 ace-in-a-day performances, 7 kills on June 19th and 9 on October 24th, earned him both the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross. The psychological collapse that followed the devastating battles of the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf produced what Japanese military psychologists later termed Hellcat psychosis among the surviving pilots, a sentiment echoed by Admiral Ozawa in his after-action report where he wrote, "The enemy's radar-guided fighter direction achieved something we thought impossible, the industrialization of air combat, a new reality where each Hellcat was not an individual fighter, but a component in a vast machine, and our pilots, no matter how skilled, were engaging not planes, but a system." The pilot shortage became so acute that by early 1945, training was drastically reduced to a mere 40 to 50 hours for Navy pilots and 60 to 70 hours for Army pilots, while kamikaze pilots received only 40 to 50 hours total, approximately 7 days of training, a stark contrast to the well-prepared American pilots. The Okinawa apocalypse from April to June 1945, during Operation Iceberg, saw the Japanese launch a staggering 1,900 kamikaze sorties against the American fleet off Okinawa, and the Hellcat became not just a fighter, but a vital defender against the desperation of these suicide attacks. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia, leading his Flying Circus division of Hellcats, shot down 23 Japanese aircraft during the campaign, his tactical innovations using divisions of 4 aircraft in coordinated attacks, making traditional Japanese tactics utterly suicidal. "We developed what we called the mowing machine," Valencia explained, a tactic where 4 Hellcats in line abreast, separated by 100 yards, would sweep through Japanese formations at high speed, with each pilot covering his sector. A deadly routine where we'd make one pass, climb back to altitude, and repeat. The mathematics of the Okinawa campaign were stark and unforgiving. Hellcats flew 38,038 combat sorties, claiming 2,351 victories against 249 losses, a 9.5-to-1 ratio, and more significantly, they prevented approximately 80% of kamikaze aircraft from ever reaching their intended targets. The technology chasm had, by 1945, become an unbridgeable abyss, with the F6F5 Hellcat, incorporating improvements that made it even deadlier, including water injection that boosted power to 2,200 horsepower, zero-length rocket launchers, improved armor, and the K-14 computing gun sight that calculated deflection automatically, further widening the gap. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's legendary ace with 28 official victories, though modern historians estimate the number to be closer to 15, encountered Hellcats for the first time in June 1944, and despite his immense skill and experience, he was nearly killed in his very first engagement. "I performed my best aerobatics," he wrote in his autobiography, "loops, rolls, split S's, every maneuver I had perfected over 200 combats, but the Hellcat followed easily, almost casually, and he survived only because the American's pilot made an error, a crucial mistake, where he forgot to release his drop tank before combat. The human cost accounting by the war's end was staggering. The F6F Hellcat had destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, lost only 270 aircraft to enemy fighters, achieved a remarkable 19.3 to 1 kill ratio, produced 305 U.S. Navy aces, and accounted for a staggering 75% of all Navy air-to-air victories, a testament to its overwhelming dominance. The human cost for Japan was nothing short of catastrophic. For of the 18,000 naval aviators who had started the war, fewer than 100 combat-experienced pilots remained by August 1945, a devastating loss of an entire generation of skilled warriors. The kamikaze equation, the transformation of Japanese naval aviation from an elite force to kamikaze operations, represented the ultimate and tragic admission of the Hellcat's superiority. For unable to compete conventionally, Japan turned its pilots into guided missiles, a desperate strategy justified by Vice Admiral Takejiro Onishi, the father of the kamikaze program, with stark and chilling mathematics. If a Zero attacks a carrier conventionally, the probability of success is near zero, he argued. The Hellcats will destroy it, but if the Zero becomes a bomb, the probability of hitting increases to 30%, a grim calculation where the pilot dies either way, but at least as a kamikaze, his death has meaning. On October 25, 1944, Hiroyoshi Nishizawa escorted the first official kamikaze mission, led by Lieutenant Yukio Seki, claiming his 86th and 87th victories, 2 F6F Hellcats, in the process. But the very next day, on October 26, 1944, Nishizawa died, a helpless passenger aboard a transport shot down by Hellcats from VF-14, Japan's greatest ace falling to the very aircraft he had so briefly bested. The final testimony came on August 15, 1945, with Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast, and at Atsugi Airfield, Captain Minoru Genda, the man who had dismissed the Hellcat as a triumph of weight over finesse, listened to the Emperor's words. Surrounded by the remnants of Japanese naval aviation, teenage pilots with a mere 40 hours of flight time, aircraft cobbled together from spare parts, and empty fuel tanks, a poignant symbol of their utter defeat. That very same day, Ensign Clarence Moore of VF-31, flying from the USS Below Wood, shot down a Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber after 2:00 p.m., the last aerial victory of World War II, the Japanese pilot, apparently unaware of the surrender, approaching the American fleet when Moore intercepted him. 2 short bursts from the Hellcat's 6 guns, bringing the Pacific Air War to its definitive end. The occupation revelation in September 1945 at Atsugi Airfield saw the first American aircraft to land after the surrender, a squadron of 12 F6F Hellcats from the USS Yorktown, and Japanese pilots, mechanics, and ground crew lined the runway to see their tormentor up close, a silent and somber gathering. American pilot Lieutenant Robert Butch Voris, an ace with 19 victories, demonstrated the Hellcat's capabilities to the assembled Japanese pilots, his casual aerobatics, loops, rolls, and climbs that would have torn a Zero apart, leaving them utterly speechless. "You have to understand," Voris told them through an interpreter, "this isn't even pushing it," a casual remark that underscored the vast technological gap, for in combat, with water injection, it's 20% more powerful, and the plane is stressed for 13 Gs, a level of durability he had never managed to break. The engineering post-mortem, conducted by Japanese engineers studying captured Hellcats after the war, revealed the true and staggering extent of American industrial superiority. For the Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine contained 2,804 precision machine parts, each one interchangeable with any other R2800 engine, a stark contrast to the Nakajima Sakai, which required the hand-fitting of components, meaning no two engines were exactly alike. Professor Jiro Horikoshi, the designer of the Zero, studied the Hellcat extensively after the war, and his conclusion was both devastating and profound. "We designed an aircraft for 1941, he admitted. They designed an aircraft system for 1945, a realization that, while we were perfecting the sword, they were building the industrial age. The production miracle of Grumman's Hellcat production itself became a weapon. With the Bethpage, New York factory operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and at peak production, a new Hellcat rolled off the assembly line every 60 minutes. A relentless pace that saw the company produce 12,275 Hellcats in just 30 months, a feat the Japanese simply couldn't comprehend. In 1944, Japan produced a total of 500 fighters of all types, while America produced a staggering 35,000 fighters that year alone, a production system that included innovations that seemed impossible to Japanese observers, such as workers using color-coded instructions to assemble complex components, shifts operating around the clock, and quality being maintained despite the incredible speed of production. The strategic revolution brought about by the Hellcat was profound, for it didn't just win battles, it revolutionized naval warfare, completely inverting the pre-war doctrine that assumed carriers were vulnerable platforms that needed to strike first to survive. The Hellcat transformed carriers into veritable fortresses that could absorb and repel any air attack, a transformation well understood by Admiral Mark Mitcher, commander of Task Force 58, who declared, "With the Hellcat, we don't need to find them first. Let them come. The F6F will destroy them at our convenience," a newfound confidence that allowed for unprecedented offensive operations, enabling American carriers to park off enemy coastlines for weeks, their Hellcat umbrellas rendering them essentially invulnerable to air attack. The cultural collision was just as significant, for beyond technology, the Hellcat represented a cultural philosophy that fundamentally invalidated Japanese military doctrine, the samurai tradition emphasizing individual excellence, spiritual strength, and the acceptance of death, while the Hellcat embodied systematic efficiency, material superiority, and the preservation of life. This philosophical gulf meant that Japanese pilots couldn't adapt to Hellcat tactics even when they understood them, for the concept of refusing combat when disadvantaged, a fundamental tenet of Hellcat doctrine, was literally unthinkable to Japanese pilots trained in the Code of Bushido. The judgment of history was delivered in 1962, when the United States Navy held a symposium on Pacific War aviation, bringing together American and Japanese veterans to discuss the conflict with the historical perspective. And Captain David McCampbell, the Navy's ace of aces with 34 victories, stated simply and unequivocally, "The Hellcat won the Pacific Air War. Period. It destroyed Japanese aviation and made our victory inevitable." Commander Saburo Sakai responded with a poignant and insightful observation. The Zero was a superior fighter, he conceded, but the Hellcat was a superior weapon system, a crucial distinction that we never understood the difference until it was too late, a tragic realization that we brought swords to a gunfight and wondered why we lost. The ultimate. Reckoning can be reduced to simple yet profound mathematics that tell a compelling story, a kill ratio of 19-1 overall, and 13-1 specifically against Zeros, with 12,275 Hellcats produced in 30 months compared to approximately 6,000 Zeros produced from 1943 to 1945, and over 5,000 American pilots trained on Hellcats, while fewer than 100 combat-capable Japanese pilots remained by August 1945. Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, who had commanded the Japanese fleet at the Philippine Sea, provided perhaps the most honest and insightful assessment of all. We laughed at the Hellcat because we didn't understand it represented not just an aircraft, but an entire civilization's approach to war. A sobering admission that, by the time we stopped laughing, our air forces had ceased to exist. The last word belongs to Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, who lived until the year 2000, and in his final interview, when asked about the Hellcat, his response captured the totality of its dominance with chilling clarity. "The Zero made Japan a great naval power," he said. "The Hellcat made Japan realize it was never as great as it believed." A humbling realization that we thought we were samurai. But the Hellcat showed us we were just men with outdated weapons facing the future. And ultimately, every Japanese pilot who survived the war survived because a Hellcat pilot chose to let them live. A profound statement that encapsulates the ultimate defeat existing at your enemy's discretion. The F6F Hellcat entered service weighing twice what the Zero weighed, carrying armor the Zero didn't have, powered by an engine the Japanese couldn't build, armed with weapons they couldn't match, guided by radars they couldn't detect, flown by pilots they couldn't equal in training, and produced in numbers they couldn't comprehend. And the Japanese pilots had laughed at it because they didn't understand that every extra pound represented not weakness, but the immense strength of a industrial democracy that could afford to protect its warriors. By the time they understood, their laughter had turned to last letters home, their mockery to kamikaze missions, their confidence to complete and utter collapse. For the Hellcat hadn't just defeated the Zeros, it had destroyed an entire philosophy of warfare, proving that in modern combat, the nation that could build the better system would inevitably destroy the nation that could only build better warriors. And so, while the Japanese pilots had laughed at the F6F Hellcat, in the end, the Hellcat had the last laugh. It always did.